over the past 3 or 4 years, the number of varieties that we screen for septoria has mushroomed. Now, at another location not far from here, we've 2,000 varieties of wheat purely being tested for septoria. We cannot rely solely on genetics to do the lifting either, because as we've seen, genetics can be overcome, and yellow rust being an example. And I would be of the view that we need chemistry to protect genetics and vice versa.
Most growers will be pleased how this year's harvest has turned out. But beyond the overall results, the real insight comes from looking closely at how each variety performed on your farm. Did one stand out for yield? Did another stand out for disease resistance? We're fortunate in Ireland to have an independent variety evaluation programme run by Department of Agriculture, providing trusted, unbiased data. Even so, on-farm performance can vary. Some varieties will simply suit certain soils, climates or management systems better than others. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. In this podcast, the first of two focusing on variety showcased at Trade Open Days, I caught up with John Dunne from Goldcrop at their variety trial event to discuss their latest offerings. We joined a conversation with John as I asked him about the newer varieties of winter wheat following a couple of seasons with only modest yields.
You know, it's lovely to be at this job and be able to present new material, and you know, it makes the job more interesting, but it's also a good thing for growers, because you're right, you know, winter wheat has been in the doldrums in terms of variety progression with a few years, and you know, some of that was down to potentially over-reliance on chemicals over the past number of decades, where chemistry was good in terms of dealing with septoria, etc., and breeders maybe didn't have the encouragement to go looking for good septoria resistance. That has changed, you know, across Europe. You know, KWS and RHET have both told me that their number one target in terms of disease across Europe is now septoria. So it's not just an Irishman's problem anymore. So
why has that changed? Is that because Europe's got wetter over the last few seasons? Or
well, I suppose if you look at countries like France, yeah, they've had a couple of wet seasons which caught them unawares, but also the lack of new chemical products coming through. You know, so you know, if you go back 20 years ago, our chemical options were really good. We were able to grow dirty varieties. But you know, our armoury is reduced, so there's more reliance on genetics. And while dirty varieties were able to be grown, the breeders didn't have an encouragement to go chasing that genetics, because septoria genetics isn't exactly there on a shelf to just pick off. It's multifactorial. You're looking for many genes to work together, and it's not simple. So it's an improving situation, and as I said, you know, the breeders have it as a major target for them. And, you know, I suppose the level of work in this country has increased as well. Teagasc are doing a lot more on it. Us as a company, over the past 3 or 4 years, the number of varieties that we screen for septoria has mushroomed. Now, whilst, Michael, you're looking at, you know, 80 or 90 wheat varieties being tested here in these plots, at another location not far from here, we've 2,000 varieties of wheat purely being tested for septoria. Yep. And you know, that's just a reflection of the effort that's going in. And now I would also say, while we're on that topic, we cannot rely solely on genetics to do the lifting either, because as we've seen, genetics can be overcome, and yellow rust being an example, cougar gene being an example. And I would be of the view that we need chemistry to protect genetics and vice versa. We need them both working together.
Yes. Coming back then to some of the varieties that you have come up with, and last year we were down here, we looked at Fitzroy, which looked exceptionally good in terms of disease resistance. How does that work? How's that worked out this year in terms of, maybe not the highest year for septoria, but there's certainly loads around?
There's loads of septoria around, you're right, and despite the dry weather we still had enough rain, and it's unfortunately it's a terribly reliable disease. Fitzroy, it is the only variety on the recommended list with a 7 out of 9 for septoria, and thankfully it seems to be a really strong resistance, as in it hasn't broken down or deteriorated. That resistance came from the variety Stig, that wasn't there yesterday, and yet that resistance has held strong. So it's obviously a good source of resistance. Fitzroy, it's yielding 102 on the recommended list, so it's no slouch in terms of yield and good straw. Did pick up a bit of yellow rust in the northeast early in the year, but what variety didn't? But to be fair, the feedback from agronomists is that it was easy to control it in Fitzroy, and they quashed it quite easily.
And that yellow rust story is a big story this year, certainly towards the northeast. And some of the other varieties that had this susceptibility early on to yellow rust, but seemed to be a little bit better later on. Does Fitzroy look like something like that or not?
Like Fitzroy would score 8 out of 9 for a yellow rust, but I know from experience, if you exert enough pressure on any variety, if there's enough spores around it or in the environment or a neighbouring crop, you can, even Dawson in its heyday, if you had enough yellow rust pressure in a neighbouring crop, you could pick up a small bit in Dawson at that point, but really high levels of resistance. And like that whole yellow rust thing, that gene, that YR15, which has been relied on in breeding for going on 30 years, has been overcome. There is a new race of yellow rust. Now,
it's a moving target anyway, John, that's for sure.
It certainly is, and I suppose it's not black and white and clear cut either, Michael, in that what's becoming evident, and this will really show in trials, and it'll be very important to take note of trials this year. Some varieties will have relied more on YR15 than others. Even if 5 varieties had YR15 in them as a source of resistance, some will have it as... Some varieties will rely on it more than others, and if a variety has other genes in there doing their work, the variety won't crash, whereas if a variety is relying heavily on YR15, it has crashed.
Okay. You have 2 other ones that caught my eye. You have Hexton there and you have Rebellion as well. Both of those maybe fill a different slot maybe for farmers, do they?
Yeah, I suppose from a Septoria point of view, they're both scoring in around 6, which is the same level as Champion. Neither of them contain the YR15 gene, so they shouldn't crash in terms of yellow rust. Both have good straw. One is quite different to the other. Like Rebellion is an early variety. When it gets on the market, all going well, it will be certainly the earliest variety on the Irish market. It could be, in terms of ripening, it could be 10 days ahead of something like Dawson in terms of ripening, and it is also quick developing in the autumn. So if you're sowing something late after beet or after maize or after spuds, something like that gets up and takes off is great, and that's coming from that X-Stays parent that's in there. Whereas Hexton then is different, later ripening and slower developing. So if you wanted to sow wheat a bit earlier, something like that is very useful.
Okay, so different slots for
and it's knowing those characteristics is important. And like we have a book or a page in our open day book, which tabulates all the varieties and shows whether they're quick or slow developing or whatever.
The other one, which I don't think there's really a lot of seed around at the moment, but Scope is a new one as well there. That looks a bit promising as well.
It does, and I suppose you're right. Like we only have 2 seed crops of it, so it's only going to be limited in terms of availability. Very high yielding and has been yielding really well in department trials. It is the highest yielding variety on the UK list currently. It doesn't have YR15 in it, and very good straw. But as I said, we just don't have as much of it in terms of production.
Moving on to winter barley, John. There's a very impressive array of winter barley varieties down there. There's different BYDV tolerant ones. There's 2 rows, there's 6 rows, there's conventionals, there's hybrids. Yeah. The list is almost endless.
Oh, it's a huge menu.
Is there or do you have in your mind different slots for different types of barley, or? Because I presume they're not all necessarily good for every situation.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I suppose it's knowing this, for an agronomist or a grower to know those characteristics, to aid their decisions. So I suppose, like if you have the likes of Integral, which is early and quick developing, but very vigorous. Like you won't find anything more vigorous than Integral. So if you're forced into a little bit of later sowing, the end of October, something like Integral is great because it can just power through and it won't run too late. I suppose we have a new 6th row coming through called Literal, which also has BYDV tolerance in it, and it's from the same breeder as Integral, but it's slower developing. And that could be useful because some of these, the early, quick developing winter barleys, they can be a bit trickier to manage in the spring sometimes. If you have them sown early, you have the need to get on with nitrogen and growth regulator when maybe the weather isn't on your side to do that. So having a variety like Literal, which is still a 6th row with BYDV tolerance and great yield, it's slower developing. So you can sow that a bit earlier and don't feel compelled to rush into it in the spring.
Much of that seed around, John?
Oh, we've only 1 seed crop of it, so it's
not for this year coming.
There might be a little bit of it knocking around, but very limited. And it has super straw as well. So.
And for somebody who's looking for maybe a 2-row option?
Yeah, so Tardis is still the big one out there, 20% of the market, and it's still the benchmark for lodging resistance, year in, year out. Like, and even I was explaining when I was doing the talk earlier, going through the plots. If I get something that stands as well as Tardis, I'm very happy. So if I can find one now with BYDV tolerance, with everything else that Tardis has, I'll be very happy.
Very good. You didn't have oilseed rape on the site today, but obviously you have it elsewhere. But we did talk a little bit about oilseed rape. There's again plenty of options in there. Yes. What's your kind of go-to variety in terms of the one that's going to be, give really good autumn vigour? It'll sprout up and kick on in the springtime?
Yeah, so I suppose if we're focusing in to start with on vigour, we have a new one called Avenger, which yield-wise it's almost up there with Armada, but its vigour is superb in the autumn and the spring. And in the UK they like that from a flea beetle point of view. Thankfully we don't have that challenge here as at present. But even if you have things like pigeons attack it in the spring and you want it to grow away, and as we know, pigeons, they're hard to get out of the crop until it starts stretching and getting too tall for them. So having something like Avenger, which will get vigorous in the spring, that's a really good plus. And it has the traits we want. It has the Scleroflex, which is a genetic resistance to Sclerotinia. It also has really good standing power as well. I suppose in terms of a market leader, it's going to be hard to surpass Armada. Like Armada has been in Department of Agriculture trials in 23 and 24, and in both years it topped the trials. And this year it looks superb commercially as well. So we would see that as becoming a market leader, and Limagrain, the breeders, see it as becoming a market leader across Europe. It just has it all.
I suppose with oilseed rape, it really has become the stable, most maybe high margin crop out there, I think, over the last number of years. How much of a factor do you think is the pod shatter resistance in terms of liability towards harvest?
Oh, sure. In my book, like I'm a farmer as well, and I wouldn't dare grow a variety unless I can look at the UK list and see that it's down as being resistant to pod shatter, because some varieties, believe it or not, still don't have pod shatter resistance in them. And if a breeder comes to me and they do, with varieties that don't have pod shatter resistance, or they can't make that claim, it's very hard to be interested in, because it's just adding another risk factor to the crop. And like we want consistency, and like as you saw on the table, Michael, there's a lot of traits in there which are bringing consistency into the crop, and you are spot on when you say the crop has become more consistent. 2 ton is now the target, and I'm almost disappointed if you don't get it.
Exactly. You've replaced on the farm here, on the trial side, I suppose, you've beans as maybe the big break crop, the non-cereal break crop in that. You might run us through down 1 or 2 of the key varieties that you think guys should be looking at in terms of spring beans now we're talking about.
Yeah, so like the market has been dominated by 1 or 2 varieties in the past, and there's not many breeders breeding beans either, for that matter. We're very lucky to have varieties coming from a breeder called P.H. Peterson in North Germany, and there's a chap there called Werner, and Werner is gone past retirement, but he's almost a one-man show has come to dominate the bean market in Europe, and he's just extremely talented at it. His first variety we had was Caprice, which was good yielding and had very nice airliness in it. But last year we commercialised Protina, and Protina topped the Department of Agriculture trials last year by a country mile. Agronomically it's good, has marginally higher protein than some of the other varieties, and already we're starting production of another new variety called Callas. So Protina and Callas will be our 2 varieties for next spring, and Callas also has a reduced level of the anti-nutritional factors convoicine and voicine and convoicine. So that's a great thing to have in a bean variety for the end users. I like beans. I love what they do for the land. It's vital that they have the protein payment, because they need it to stack up commercially. And on our home farm, they play an important part in the rotation. We use rape, beans as our main rotations at home. Oats the odd time as well.
Any flexibility in those varieties? We kind of mentioned there were spring varieties. Any flexibility for those sown in the autumn time, or how would they perform in that slot?
We haven't done trials on it, Michael, but I know Teagasc have done trials sowing spring beans in the autumn, and yeah, some very big yields can be achieved. I suppose they are still spring varieties at the end of the year, or at the end of the day, and if you got a very hard winter, I'd fear for some of those spring varieties.
Okay, could be tough on them. We might just finish up talking a little bit about spring barley, the last kind of biggest crop out there. Again, lots of varieties to see here. I mean, look, they all kind of, I suppose, slot fairly firmly into a malting category for the most part, but there's still differences between them. Is there something new this year that hasn't really been grown over the last couple of years that looks exceptional?
I suppose in terms of new varieties, the main one that we have out commercially this year, and it's still small because it's new, is a variety called Belter. And that's coming from a new breeding programme in the UK being run by Secobra. And it looks to have very good malting quality. It seems to be gaining wide acceptance in the UK based on the pilot tests that have been done on it. It's a non-GN barley, so it fits the distilling and the brewing end of things. And agronomically it looks really well. And in Department of Ag spring barley trials, it's yielding really consistency. So we've high hopes for that one. We've another one behind that coming along called Bennett. I didn't make too much about it because we only have one seed crop of it, but that looks exceptional from a yield and a malting quality point of view.
So pretty much all of the barleys out there, spring barleys at the moment, have the MLO gene, so they're all resistant to mildew. Any progress being made in terms of resistance to Rinco or net blotch?
We have some varieties in the market that mightn't be that strong on either disease, but if you look at the recommended list now, there's a lot of them scoring 7 for Rinco, 7s for net blotch. So the breeders have done a really good job in terms of building in high levels of resistance. Now, MLO is a very high resistance to mildew. It's not complete and utter. You know, you can get a little bit of mildew in a variety with MLO resistance in it.
It's probably a good thing.
But it's not like the old varieties where we were trying to chase it all the time. And I suppose another thing that is coming, and like we have trialled them in the past, and Secoper in particular have them coming, is BYDV tolerance. That is coming in spring barley. And I've had them here in the past. They were early material. The straw wasn't good enough in them. But talking to the breeders, they're getting near the point now.
How many years?
Well, I would hope to have some in my trials here next year.
Okay.
Yeah. So
probably 3-4 years away. Maybe.
Yeah, they have to stay standing and they have to yield and all the rest. But it's a direction I want to move in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's a problem this year that's kind of turned up very late.
Yeah, totally.
Growers have seen it, I suppose, and it's it'll certainly be welcome news, I think.
And environmentally, Michael, granted BYDV tolerance in winter crops is a great thing from the crops point of view, but environmentally you have a lot more pollinators flying around in April and May than you do in November. And if we had the ability to leave the pyrethroids out of the spray tank, I think that would be a great thing.
John, we have loads of other crops we could talk about. There's triticale, there's spring wheat, there's rye. There's various different things we could talk about. We're just not going to get to it all. Look, again, congratulations today. It's a fantastic trial site. It's something I think for any of the listeners, especially farmers, you need to get the trials. You need to go looking and seeing what's in there. And I think, as you pointed out today, as we're looking across the winter wheat at the moment, you need to get into the untreated. Yeah. That's very where the differences are.
Yeah, and also when you go to an event, Michael, it's grand to be reading a leaflet or a book, but when you go to an event, conversations occur, and it's not always what's printed. We end up going down different roads in terms of conversations, and everybody learns from everybody else, and there's a lot to learn.
John, as always, thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Next week, we'll be talking about organic manures and a new project called Soil Cycle, which aims to answer practical questions about applying organic manures to crops in the spring. The following week, we'll return with the second part of our report from the Seed Company's Open Day, featuring Tim O'Donovan from SeedTech. A date for your diary is the Teagasc Crops Forum, which takes place on Wednesday, September the 10th in the Killashee Hotel, Naas, County Kildare. We have a great lineup for you, including the latest on varieties and an update on yellow rust. We'll take a deeper dive into rye as a crop which holds plenty of promise for both tillage and livestock farms. So finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.